The ballroom was full of light and music. Cinderella felt like she was in a dream. She wore a lovely dress and special shoes made of glass. Everything felt perfect. The prince had danced with her all night. She had never been so happy before. The prince looked at her with a kind smile. Then the clock started to ring. It was almost midnight. Cinderella's smile faded. The magic would end soon. She had to leave before it was too late. Cinderella turned and ran toward the large staircase. The prince called out, "Wait, please stay." She stopped for a moment, hearing his voice. She wanted to stay, but she knew she couldn't. She looked at him one last time, then started running again. Her heart was beating very fast. Each step felt harder than the last. The clock kept ringing, and each sound made her worry more. She had to reach the door before it was too late. Cinderella's dress started to lose its shine. Her shoes felt strange on her feet. She looked down and saw the shoes changing into her old ones. She felt scared and ran even faster. One of her glass shoes slipped off her foot, but she didn't stop. She knew she had to keep going. The door was right there in front of her. She could make it. She pushed herself forward, but as the clock rang again, she tripped and fell down. The prince ran to help her. He looked worried. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling down. Cinderella wanted to hide. Her dress turned into old rags. She felt small and shy. Her pretty hair became messy. The prince looked at her with big eyes, but he did not look angry. He seemed curious instead. Cinderella tried to stand up quickly. She shook her head and took a step back, but the prince reached out his hand. "Wait," he said softly. Cinderella didn't know what to do. She felt tears in her eyes. She shook her head again and turned around. "I'm sorry," she said, starting to run away. The prince stood up fast. "Please don't go. I just want to know your name," he called out. Cinderella kept running and did not look back. One of her shoes stayed behind on the stairs. She could not go back for it. She ran out of the palace and into the cool night air. The magic was gone by the time she reached the garden. Her dress was now old and torn. Her hair was messy and tangled. She wore her old shoes. Cinderella stopped to rest. She looked at herself and felt tears on her face. She was just a poor girl again, nothing special or magical. "It's really over," she said softly. She wiped her eyes with her hands. "It was all just a dream. He will never look for a girl like me now." Cinderella stayed in the garden for a while longer. She looked up at the castle, still bright with lights. Music and laughter filled the air. She remembered dancing with the prince. His kind words and sweet smile were fresh in her memory. She took a deep breath and turned to leave. Her heart felt heavy, but she knew she could not go back. She started to walk home. Each step felt slow and sad, as if the sadness was pulling her down. Back at her small dark house, her stepmother and stepsisters were waiting. "Where have you been?" her stepmother asked in a loud voice. "Outside," Cinderella said softly. Her stepmother frowned, but did not ask more questions. The stepsisters looked at her dirty clothes and laughed. "Did you have fun in those old rags?" one of them asked in a mean way. Cinderella stayed quiet and went to her corner of the house to sleep. The next morning, there was news all over the town. The prince was looking for the girl who had left a glass shoe behind. Cinderella's heart beat faster when she heard the news. Could it be true? She dared to hope. Maybe he would remember her, even in her rags. But her stepmother saw the hope in her eyes. "You're dreaming again, girl," she said in a mean way. "A prince would never want a poor girl like you." Cinderella felt her face grow hot with shame. She turned away quickly, but inside, the hope was still there. The prince was looking for her. She kept busy all day with work. Her stepmother and stepsisters talked about how one of them might marry the prince and become a princess. Each word felt like a sharp pain to Cinderella. She wished she could tell them that it was her, that she was the girl the prince wanted to find. Days passed, and the prince kept looking. He visited many houses, hoping to find the girl whose foot fit the glass shoe. Cinderella waited in silence. Then, one day, there was a knock at their door. Her stepmother opened it with a big smile. Two royal guards stood there with the glass shoe. "We are looking for the girl who wore this," one guard said. Cinderella held her breath. Her stepmother's eyes turned cold as she looked at Cinderella. "It's not for you," her stepmother said, pointing at Cinderella. "It's for my daughters. They will try it on." The guards nodded, looking unsure. Each stepsister tried the shoe, but it was too small for their feet. The shoe did not fit. Cinderella felt both hope and fear grow inside her. One of the guards looked at her. "What about her?" he asked, pointing at Cinderella. Her stepmother's mouth opened, but the guard held up his hand. "The prince said every girl must try," the guard said firmly. Cinderella stood up slowly. Her hands shook as she walked forward. She did not speak. The guard handed her the shoe. She slid her foot into it. It fit perfectly. Everyone in the room gasped. Her stepmother's face turned red with anger. The other guard nodded. "We have found her," he said. Cinderella looked at the guards, then at her stepmother. She felt very light, like she was dreaming. "You?" her stepmother asked, her voice full of anger. "This is a joke. She is just a poor girl." The guards shook their heads. "The prince will want to see her." They took Cinderella out of the house. Her stepsisters stared with open mouths, too shocked to talk. Cinderella felt her heart beat very fast. She walked with the guards to the palace. She could hardly believe this was real. Her old dress and shoes looked strange in the big, shiny rooms. When they reached the prince, he smiled warmly. "It's really you," he said softly. Cinderella felt her face turn red. "Yes, it's me," she whispered shyly. The prince stepped closer. "I don't care about your rags or the magic. I care about you," he said kindly. Cinderella felt very happy and safe. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him. "You really mean that?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Will you stay?" he asked. She smiled and nodded. Cinderella nodded. "I will stay," she said softly. The prince took her hand and led her into the ballroom. Everyone turned to look at her. She felt shy, but the prince held her hand tight. He told everyone she was the girl who had stolen his heart. Cinderella could not stop smiling. As the night went on, they danced together again. This time, she knew she would not have to run away when the clock rang at midnight. From that day on, Cinderella's life changed. She became the prince's wife. Her stepmother and stepsisters could no longer treat her badly. They said they were sorry. Cinderella forgave them. She knew she was happy now. The prince loved her for who she was, not for her magic. And so, Cinderella's dream finally came true. She was loved and cared for. She was no longer a poor girl, but a happy and kind princess.